guys, looking like a little bit of a chop close today, and like I was saying earlier, it kind of we're kind of expecting that this is not really going to make likely any huge moves into the close today, but mostly kind of set up to mostly trade sideways. It seems like at this point. So while it's trying to figure itself out, and we are kind of running out of time on the day here, I'd rather spend this time to go over with you guys some of the ideas that we have going into tomorrow, some of the trades from today, and kind of a few things in between that I had in mind that might be helpful for your trading going forward. Okay, so coming into today, guys, there's a couple things. So one is, as we discussed yesterday and a few days this week, we've been working on kind of a larger, big picture trend here on ES, just going back to like the last Friday. And we had the trend initially was kind of set up this way, and they broke below it on Tuesday, and then they recovered it. So we just moved the trend line over, and since then they've been really bouncing off this area pretty much every time that they've come to test it thus far. So coming into today, there was a few things that really we had to take note of. The big thing was we did have a huge gap up. I think that those of you guys who've been trading with me for a while would be aware that probably my least favorite type of open is a big gap up, because generally speaking, after a gap up, the bias is still technically long, but buying flags into extensions is pretty much out. So the only plays I'm really looking at on these gap up days are bounce plays, typically after bigger pullbacks on bigger time frame trend holds. We got a little bit lucky today because honestly, it could have been a day where we spent a lot of time shopping, because if it was going to be a day where the bulls were going to hold on to this thing, in order for it to consolidate enough to be able to make any other move here, it likely would have needed most of the day of trading sideways, and shaking out longs and trapping shorts into weakness before it'd be ready to go higher. But since we mostly sold off early today, it made it really optimal for us because it gave a few opportunities to play bounces. There were four areas where the market bounced today. I was able to capture three of them. The sad thing is that this is such an obvious in hindsight, but we were aware this is like the lowest level that we were expecting um, to possibly see a bounce would be this trend line. And like I mentioned earlier, I do think that it's likely that this level is going to be very weak from here. Like I think if we get back below it, it's going to be problematic and actually trigger some real sell pressure out there. But for now, this trend still is holding. And today, we actually, even after the big all-time high gap up, we had a big enough pullback today to actually test that trend line. I mean, it's pretty much almost to the tick. It was like within a point or two, and it bounced right off it. So some of the levels that, and I'll just go ahead and clear the board here from those arrows, and we'll just kind of look at this from a fresh perspective. So looking at an hourly chart here, and we're looking over the course of since basically going back to last Wednesday, so a little over a week here. And yeah, it's been, mostly consolidating here. So, and again, it hasn't been the most favorable action for, like I've been saying, it's been really just a dip buyer's market, because every time that we've had a big move lower, it creates a good opportunity to get long. But then they fire it back, and then it's a little too extended to get any follow through with these flags. And like none of these were really ready to make bigger moves. So you'll see that it's been tough for these flag buyers, but the dip buyers have just been getting away with really capturing a lot of nice moves off this trend line. But then you'll notice that going into like intraday, these types of flags were failing, and yeah, overall, the intraday trading for longs that are playing these types of flags were not really favorable, but the market was providing these big dips. And yesterday we had a long at 57.73. That was a great opportunity to trail an overnighter. For me, unfortunately, I did have a break-even stop on it after reaching a few targets up to, I think it was 86 or 87 yesterday. It fired back, took my trail out, and then went on to make a huge gap overnight. But my purpose with every one of those bottom bounce plays, if I'm trading off my Iron Beam account, is to try to trail. If the trend is bigger, these are the best opportunities to get multi-day or longer trails. So I'm always intending to try to keep even a small piece, even if it's only a small piece on for the bigger trend. It didn't work out yesterday. It was still a good trade there intraday, but really, really was disappointing to wake up to that big of a gap. And again, some things that I thought about, like I talked about earlier, like, after locking in and guaranteeing a win into the bigger time frame target, maybe using just a slightly wider stop, like the low a day stop would have kept me in there. But my data suggests that usually taking the trail out where I do is the right move, and it did actually prove that a couple times today with the trades that I was in intraday. So, anyways, that's something that I'll keep an eye on in case I see an opportunity to improve my system there. But as of now, I'm pretty happy with everything. So, anyways, good day today overall. We again, I would have obviously I would have loved to have been short, but this is just not the game I play. If we're gapping up and we're still in an uptrend, I'm going to be looking at long setups into bigger pullbacks. So again, there's things that we always remember to do, and that is like if we're into a gap up morning, it's almost always going to be looking for longs after short traps or into bigger picture trend holds after bigger pullbacks. So an example of short traps would be like, okay, we had this big overnight gap, big overnight move higher. So if we're going to be going after longs from here, very, very, almost never will you see me trying to be buying like high day breaks in these areas. But generally what I'll be looking for is for it to start consolidating and like trying for lower and sort of failing to make moves lower. And what that does is these shakeout moves and these bear flags, they'll shake out longs from, if in this example, like maybe longs from yesterday in the bottom bounce signal or longs from overnight who played the hourly chart flag over here. But the purpose of that is just A, to consolidate so the bigger time frame trends like the 4-hour EMA and the hourly EMA start to catch up to the price action, so it's no longer just extended. Like as a chart gets extended, generally once it's extended, we then need it to trade sideways for a while and shake out before it's ready to move higher, or have a bigger pullback and a bounce right before higher. So that's why the two plays I generally look for, either a big pullback and a bottom bounce play, typically off the 4-hour EMA if it sets up that way, or off one of the bigger levels if you zoom out and look left. But if it's going to be a day where it doesn't want to pull back big, like again, I think we got a little lucky today because it had some really good pullbacks. It actually came all the way back to the trend line and gave longs another big opportunity to capture another 30 or so points, and who knows, maybe more if they want to go up a little higher tomorrow. But if it's going to be not a big pullback day, then I set the expectation early, like when we came in today, I kind of explained like, look, if we can't get a bigger pullback today, it's likely going to be an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours before we can shake out enough to really make this thing move again, because you got all those overnight longs. I honestly have to believe that when we gap up, 40, 60 points into all-time highs, most of the shorts are going to be ejected from this thing at either overnight or at the open. So there's not going to be a whole lot of shorts left in it, which is what really helps fuel some of these moves higher. If you kind of zoom out on the hourly chart, there's probably a lot of areas here where shorts were probably trying to catch a reversal a little bit too early, right? And it kept catching a trend every time. So I can kind of look back at this chart and see, well, I can just count a bunch of areas here where shorts might have tried it. And maybe they were swing shorting and, trying to pick a top somewhere here. Well, could have tried it here. They could have been trying it here. Any one of these bear flag or support break areas. But all the while this is happening, the bigger time frame trends, like the daily chart trend, is kind of catching up, and it's kind of getting more and more consolidated. And like I was saying 2 days ago, it was kind of fueling up, looking like it was really priming up for an all-time high break. So in the case like today, where we do have the big gap up and it's overnight, which is my least favorite thing to happen, because I mean, obviously ideally we'd want to catch this move intraday when we're all awake and at the desk for it. A lot of the moves have been happening at overnight lately. So that's again why I've been looking to trade a little bit more off my Iron Beam account where I can do the overnights. But if I get and I only really do that, guys, obviously, if I get a signal into a bottom bounce play that's nicely in the money and there's no risk involved with the overnight hold. Okay, so anyways, if we come in with a big gap like this, there's only really two plays I'm interested in. The first one is going to be if we can pull back to the trend. Of course, I'm going to want to try to play a bottom bounce off it. But there were some big levels that I was watching, like this initial, like this all-time high from before, basically the breakout level. We were definitely watching around there and caught a little bounce near it early. Next level down I was watching was sort of this zone around 90. I'll get a little zoom in a little bit. We'll talk about it when I get to that trade. But then another one in here, which was also caught for a nice bounce. And then There's one more that I played in there, and then the big one obviously is going to be this trend line. Um, I didn't get a signal on like so dip buyers once again made out like bandits on this trend hold. I'm getting more and more nervous about this thing not holding now. Every time that it's dipped so far, it has held. I am starting to feel like we're going to be pretty close to this finally having a slightly bigger correction because it's kind of due for a shakeout on the daily chart. So I'm not getting in front of these dips without a 5 minute chart bottom bounce signal, the one that we teach and trade. So did not catch that, unfortunately, that bigger bounce. But if we're not going to get the big pullback for bounce plays, which is the my favorite in this type of scenario, because again, sometimes if you can get that signal near the lows, you can end up, you know, in the trade for a while and sometimes even trailing it for a day or two or more. So if it's not the case, if the case is we just kind of pull back a little bit at the open, then we're holding. Well, then I need a lot of sideways. I'm thinking about all the areas where longs likely entered into dips near the trend. I'm thinking about the ones that came in overnight, the ones that chased it. Well, we got to shake out a lot of these people. And if it broke all-time highs, there's no more levels for shorts to risk off of. So it's likely that the shorts probably all, for the most part, a lot of them got taken out. Without the shorts in there, it's hard to make a move higher. It would be all reliant on people buying these all-time highs in an already extended chart. So, in order to set up for intraday higher, I would expect a lot of chop and sideways with attempts to move lower that fail. And what's happening on these attempts, like I mentioned earlier, is we're kind of essentially shaking out longs from prior days, which is helpful to get less people. There'll be less people selling if it were to set up another, flag and pop again. Less long selling, but mainly also to trap shorts. That they'll help fuel the next move. If you look at today, yeah, I think a lot of buyers came in around the trend line for obvious reasons, but I also think that what helped make that move so good today was that it was nothing but sellers pretty much the whole day leading up to it. So a lot of shorts needed to cover out, and shorts were way too late getting in on this thing under that 90 area. So this is likely where a lot of the short trapping happened, and the market is pretty much all about trapping liquidity and then ripping. If we're going higher, the opposite side, when we're going lower, it's typically because longs bought too high. Like in this case, guys, you got to think about it this way: the market made an all-time high overnight. Here's a 4-hour chart. We're zooming it out. There's no more levels for shorts to risk off anymore. Most of them probably got taken out. Like a lot of shorts probably got taken out up there, except for ones that aren't using a risk level in mind. So it's gonna like have less shorts in it, which means less people covering, which means less chances for it to move higher. And I don't think anyone in the right mind is gonna be buying up here after it's a huge gap like that. So it makes sense that in areas like this, the buy pressure can dry up, and finally the sellers can start to come in. It's usually like when shorts are trying to like get it, if they're early, they almost always pay for it, like in this case. But if they wait for it to exhaust, like to finally blow all the shorts out, that's usually where it turns. Is now there's all these longs in it, and there's no shorts covering anymore, and then so it's just all these longs stumbling over each other, taking sells to move it lower. And now again, if we're going to fuel another move, well, if this ended up, let's say for the sake of argument, now we're supposed to assume this is going higher as long as the trend is intact, but part of me is starting to think that we're getting close to a trend break here. And again, this is speculative. I'll still trade what the market tells me to trade each day based on my system without that thought in my head. But if it does this, this is great because what this does is what I just talked about. We talked about this on the smaller time frame intraday, but this is now the big picture. It's going to shake out overhead longs, people that bought the all-time high break. If we break trend, let's say tomorrow or Monday or Tuesday, and then take out today's lows and the prior day's lows, this is going to really get a lot of longs out of there. I'll get a lot of these guys that were in here out of it. The daily EMA will get tested, and then the bigger time frame players will likely come in and check it there. So then if it recovers from there, we'll now have another really good looking setup for potentially to make a new all-time high if the market wants to continue the trend. But also we'll have a lot of shorts in it from these points too, possibly shorts here, anything like that, and they'll help fuel the move higher as well. If you look at a daily chart right now, you'll also see that there's a bit of an extension on it. Now that doesn't mean that it's going to go lower. It could trade sideways like it has over here, even when it's extended and then move higher. But yeah, it's starting to look a little bit suspect. The EMA is catching up, so it's not too extended, but I I wouldn't be entirely surprised if after the all-time high break we had a little bit of a shakeout, whether it's tomorrow or Monday. But like I said, we'll have an idea tomorrow which way we're going to go with it. For now, let's go over a couple of the points on this chart here. So these are the zones that I was looking at early. So no trades in the first 20 minutes. I was just, basically we just needed this thing to either show us that it's going to shake out lower to try to grab some long plays, or trade a lot of sideways and trap shorts and then show us a long signal. My preference was, because of the huge gap up today, my preference was definitely that we would trade lower and catch bounces of a few of those zones, and then hopefully just catch one that really trails well and continues the trend. The most likely one that was going to hold and continue the trend is obviously the biggest trend that we see here down in the 80s, low 80s. But all of these zones were somewhat of interest to me, obviously. So the first area was like 93 to 5800. So 5793 to 5800. This is basically just like the last sort of resistance area and the breakout area through the all-time highs. If we got a deep pullback with a large extension after the open today into an area like that, this is the kind of zone where I would look for a short-term bounce. If I can get a signal somewhere in this area, I'd usually be looking to sell it into a bigger moving average retest, and then I would try to hold it if they want to hold on and recover the trend. Sometimes you can stay in them. I wasn't sure today, guys. I kept saying today that today's probably not the day to be too greedy with the early bounce plays, because I figured that the shorts were all out of it from the all-time high break, and we'd have a harder time catching a trend. So they were still good bounce plays, but just I wasn't expecting them to like be huge ones unless we were to catch it way down lower at the bigger trend line. So this was an area of interest, and the other one down there was the big trend line that we just discussed, the bigger picture one, which ended up being the low 80 area. Actually, I adjusted that later on in the day. Well, this first one was a pretty small trade, really, but it's a small long scalp. It had finally shown us a little bit of something here. The first big area that I was looking at was the 4-hour EMA. So coming into the open today, it's been kind of chopping around the 4-hour chart, but usually once the market gets trending, if it's going to trend, it'll usually hold that 4-hour and trend off it in the big picture. As you can see today, they actually ended up breaking through it, but they did bounce off it in the short term, and that's where the first decent little trade came from there. So at the time of after the open, the 4-hour EMA was actually right around 0275. Believe it or not, it bounced off 5803. Just one tick above that 4-hour EMA. It usually does hold and at least try to bounce off that level most times. The fact that it made a nice move off that level, but the fact that it put a lower high, rejected VWAP, and came back through it, that was a big time sell signal for me. So you can see that once it broke that, it broke the 4-hour chart trend, and a lot of sell pressure came in. So, I mean, it provided a scalp opportunity for alongside. As we saw here, the 580825 was the trigger to get long there. It didn't provide a lot in terms of Rs, because it would have had to fully recover to turn into a bigger trade. So, if this is the trigger here, well, if it ended up recovering fully, then sometimes those can trail and retest the highs, and that's what you want. If you're going to be risking this, you want to try to get 2.5, 3R is the sweet spot, really. But then when you trail, sometimes you can get it to go 6, 7, 8 more. So, but in this case, guys, the purpose of this trade was we were already extended to the downside. If the bulls were going to catch a bid on it, this is exactly the area where I thought they would likely be doing it. The 4-hour EMA was right there. The prior breakout level was there. If you look left on the chart and zoom it out. So I think it was a good area to try. And also they had a failed bear flag lower. Shorts were too late right here, and it caught them into a little bit of a weak low. So to me, this was a sound area for at least a scalp, and that's why I called it as a scalp, just because I knew that something special had to happen for this to get back in a trend. I actually believed it probably could go lower after the bounce, but it was a good spot to capture, maybe 6 to 8 points. Is kind of what I was thinking. So in this case, actually about 10 points total. So it had a pretty good outcome there. It did break above the 5 EMA, but it never recovered that trend, right? So it broke over the 5-minute chart trend, but it couldn't hold over it and then continue back through VWAP. So that was a really straightforward one. Same as always, take the trigger, sell into 5 EMA, sell towards VWAP, trail a little bit in case it holds a higher low for higher. If not, then just bail, break even, and move on. So that was a bailout, break even on the trail, but a good overall really good trade, and then move on to the next one. Next spot down was everyone down was a little bit better than the last because we started to get more extended, right? Um, and yeah, actually with that one, guys, I yeah did okay with that one for what it was for scalp. The next one down was 57.95. And this area I particularly actually liked a little bit better than the first one because it had, well, much of a larger extension of the VWAP area, which you can see almost got tested. The trigger price on this one was, excuse me, 57.95, and that was just after 11 a.m. So it was right in here. And we had actually shown some decent bottoming action leading up to that. We had nothing but downside all the way through the morning. But if you zoom out, this was sort of towards the top of, you can see where this area was kind of acting as resistance. And so it's a sort of a zone, guys, where I'd be watching to see if there's any chance of it becoming support. And see if maybe a bounce could occur from it because again this is the type of area where and we did get a nice bounce off it got 10 points out of that one as well but it eventually like we will see if it's going to hold the trend or not recover the trend in this case it ended up being a good bounce play for 10 points but it did not recover the trend completely again it didn't hold over the EMAs and reverse the trend and start to continue it to the upside. So this ended up just being another kind of good scalp, but again, a really sound area to look, an area that had been acting as resistance previously, into an extended chart that had room to revert to the mean being the moving averages that we watch. Um, so yeah, both were very similar plays. The first one was just a little bit more of a scalpy play, in my opinion. It was a little bit early in the day with less of an extension. Still wanted to be in that one because there is a chance they could have recovered the trend and then retested the all-time high again, and that would have been a great entry for it. All the way down there at 0350, pretty close to lows, very tight risk there. This one was a little bit of a wider risk, but it showed some really good signs. Look at the 5-minute chart. Look at the wicks, these tail wicks here on the 5-minute chart that led into that trade. Kept showing us that the buyers were really trying to show up there between 88 and 92.25. They couldn't really close any candles below that 92.25. They just kept testing below it. And they had a couple of, a bear flag attempt there that didn't really follow through. The main reason I got involved there, though, was A, it was kind of a big area, but B, was I saw the bottoming action and there was a lot of room for a 15-minute chart test. And I saw this as one that if I got in at 95, it likely would break the high of the previous 15-minute chart candle, which it did here, and get shorts covering and get a fueled up move back to the 15 EMA. So with these plays, guys, we're obviously this is technically sort of a counter trend play because technically you can see we're trending lower. So it is important with these ones with the system the way that I trade them. It is important to me that I do take early sells. Some of them seem really early, and they are. I do that for a good reason because basically the goal is to eliminate the risk as early as possible and then trail the winner. Um, but yeah, this one was as good as I could ask for, really. The big sell zone target I was thinking was 55, like I drew it here, 58.05 to 58.09. It hit 58.05.50. Um, I got sells all the way up to, I think it was 0325-ish. And then I had my finals up towards VWAP. So very, very clean, high quality trade there. It was a little bit, I would say, it was a little dicey, a little bit dicey in there. I mean, if you guys recall, I didn't really, I knew that I was buying a little bit close to the EMA there, and that was a risk, but I saw some really good signs on the chart that made me believe that it was still a good area to take a risk for this. And well, like I said, it worked out. It did what I thought it would do. It would have been too late, really, to buy it up here, in my opinion. So yeah, ended up working out okay. Pretty good, actually. Really good trade there. I feel like I'm missing one, as I had 3 trades this morning, and I believe the third one was maybe in here. Did I miss one? Okay, that was the third and last trade I took, and that one was a little bit dicey, guys, because I do recall now. I took it long. I thought I took that one long at 93.50. Yeah, sorry guys, I'm so sorry. I messed this up. The third and final long I took today was at 92.50. That was right in here, which was really tight to the lows, 88, like real tight in there. So I really like that spot. I'm sorry, I actually missed one other trade here that I forgot to mention. That was 57.95 into 11 a.m. And then, or maybe I just changed the trigger on that one. Either way, it was an excellent morning with a few good trades there and some nice follow through on them. All basically the three areas that had a bounce in the chart were the three areas that I traded today, so I was really happy with that. Actually, I think it was first one here, guys. Yeah, it was first one here, second one here, and then third one here. So, and then after that, I really didn't see a whole lot of value in sticking around. With long side, I was from that point, I was only really interested in the next big level down. So, like after these bounces happen, we're no longer extended anymore. Notice how like the 15-minute EMA, for example, is now acting as resistance. Well, I don't want to be buying anywhere near that. I'm looking for these setups where I can play revert back to the mean. So once that happened, I wasn't going to be interested in taking any longs until we tested much lower. I was thinking, well, the obvious level was the bigger trend. So if we go back to a 4-hour chart, basically anywhere between 78, which is around the trend line, to 85 area, which was just kind of another zone that I was watching. There was, so here's the multi-day sort of trend line right there that it bounced off of, but we had already had a few bounces. I wanted to come down towards lows. I think I was just looking at basically the low a day there was 86, or actually I was looking at, sorry, more like this 84 area. This was acting as resistance before. But basically I just wanted anything, like in this zone was where I was going to be very interested in looking at bounce plays. And like I said, it was a little bit, I was a little bit unfortunate that there wasn't a setup in there. We were aware of how big of a level that was, and all we saw the whole last week or so was as soon as it touched a level like that, buyers would just come in straight away. So there wasn't really any setups off those levels. It's been more of a dip buyer's paradise. I feel like over the last couple weeks, and a little bit of a nightmare for flag buyers, with a lot of failed flag attempts due to the extension on the bigger time frames. So when the chart, the bottom line is this: when the chart is extended, we're going to be a little bit more interested in pullbacks and bottom bounce plays. When things are tight and coiled up on the daily chart and 4-hour chart, then we can be fine with being more playing flags and typical flag setups and stuff like that. So that leads me to the afternoon session, which again, the only real play that I saw here was going to be to grab, if there was a chance to get this dip with a setup, I would have played it. It did not give the setup that I usually teach you guys in this area and that I usually trade. Um, in hindsight, knife catchers got it, but there was no secondary setup either. I was actually going to pay attention here for a possible secondary setup. I wanted it to try lower, trap shorts, and then flag back to the VWAP area. But it just ended up being a straight, just like every other time last week or two, pretty much just a straight knife catch bounce. And when we got into the close today, look, one of the things that I really want to hope that some of the newer traders can take away from these streams is knowing where to avoid. This is just like yesterday. When I say that, like, hey, this is an area where it's very unlikely to have an edge for longs or shorts, I really mean that. Like, I really do think that it's likely an area where you're going to get chopped up. If you're trying to go short into weakness, it's just going to keep holding. It's an area that's likely going to punish both sides. So, like, there are areas in the market where you just got to sit out, and this is one of them. And it doesn't really matter that it's power hour because it already made the move, right? So we already made this big bounce off that 70 area. And I'll show you why I was seeing this the way I was seeing it, why I was not convinced that it was a long or a short at this point. The reason is, well, obviously that, it's still under VWAP. That's not all though. The hourly chart, so first of all, we've already had a huge bounce. 20, 30-point bounce without a pullback. So now it's going to need a ton of sideways and chop before it'll be ready to fuel and move higher. But hourly EMA still acting as resistance. So it's still technically in a downtrend in that time frame. Just for the same reason, we wouldn't want to be buying long up here. We don't want to be buying it here either. We either want to catch it in the bounce, or if we're going to get a setup, it's not going to happen today. We would need it to try lower tomorrow, hold up, recover, then flag. That's a more sound looking setup. Shake out the longs underneath. this hourly chart candle's low, trap shorts trying to play the bear flag. Then if they recover and flag, all good. This could be a setup we could play, for example. But there's a lot of areas where actually there was a similar into the close yesterday where you could just tell that the market's not ready for the next move, and it's super important not to get chopped up in those areas because you really can get killed in these spots. And it's kind of easy sometimes to determine, well, that's what I'm here for, is to help you determine where these areas are. But usually, like after a big move and a recovery to the middle of the range, if we're in a downtrend on the hourly chart, the 4 hour chart, for example, we're kind of under VWAP, but we've already stopped out all the longs into a big move lower. I've never ever had success with trying to short after a bounce like this, and I never do it for that reason. My data shows that there's no profitability for me in this, taking a short here. But also the long side is going to be extremely difficult because it needs a lot of sideways. It's already had a big bounce, so it needs consolidation. It needs to kind of trap shorts and shake out longs before it might be ready for a move higher. And even this move higher that we're seeing right into the close here is likely going to be probably a weak one. But this is just the last of the shorts stopping out. I don't think there's any value in this as a trade, especially from a risk reward perspective and into these bigger time frame EMAs where the odds are just more likely that it's going to chop or have a weak move versus give us a decent sized trade. So I think the play into the close today really was to sit on the hands. And usually, like when I get to that point, I'll start to think about some ideas for the following day, which I'll talk about now. So technically speaking, guys, if we're holding trend, which we are, if we're over 4 hour EMA and hourly chart EMA, we're supposed to be thinking long bias, and that's always going to remain true. But like I said, I can see some different ways that this might go, and I'll adjust based on what I see tomorrow morning. I do kind of see that I think that this 57.95 area is kind of important now because if we end up putting a lower, like I'm concerned that if they end up putting a lower high, like if the market does end up putting a lower high in tomorrow, which I mean, this pattern is tough for higher guys without a lot of sideways now. Like maybe if they can do something like this, then maybe we can get higher early next week. I'm kind of hard pressed to see this, and I could be wrong, but I'm kind of hard pressed to see this while it's possible. I'm a little concerned that if they break under 95 here, if we get an overnight lower high, and then tomorrow, especially late in the day on a Friday, if we break back under 95, well, it's going to be breaking the bigger trend. And then if that fuels up enough sell pressure to break today's lows, we could actually finally have a bigger pullback. However, I'm only going to be looking at short side tomorrow. Oops, excuse all that. Let's get rid of that. I'm only going to be looking at short side tomorrow if we set up on the short side, which means that if we open or trading under the 4 hour hourly EMA, if we do this, actually, we'll be trading short tomorrow. So that's an interesting prospect because that'd be amazing if it ended up being a setup where, for example, we break back through the 4 hour chart trend to the downside, breaks the trend line, and then it fuels enough sellers to break today's lows and really take us down into this zone here. Possibly could get a short in an area like this and then possibly catch a nice bounce play off one of these areas down here. So that's speculative, of course. The main thing that we're going to watch for tomorrow is simply the same thing we do every single day. Going into 10 a.m. after the first 30 minutes, if we're holding trend, it's unlikely, guys, that I'd just be shorting that 95 break. It would have to show me a lot more than that, like a failed flag and then like some weakness over here. Then like something like this would get me short most likely. But if we're just holding up tomorrow, let's say we test and hold around over under the 95 here, and then we're back up here. I would technically just have to keep taking long signals because technically we're still in trend. We're still holding trend. The hourly chart, 4 hour charts are all still in trend. I wouldn't expect big moves, but I would still take long signals until they stop working. But the big level most likely that I'll be paying a whole lot of attention to tomorrow is this whole area right here between like 57.95 to like 58.05, just that 10-point range. I just think it's a very important area at this point in the chart. And again, it's not that I would not say that it's a short if 95 breaks, especially overnight or early. That could test and still hold. It could still be long bias, but it isn't a level that I'm curious about because if we do hold, let's just say, for example, and again, if we're opening up over these moving averages, we're just going to be looking at long bias trades. We're not even thinking about short yet. But let's just say that we do open up for long bias trades like this. This is just thinking a little bit ahead here. Like say we get a setup for long bias trades. It tests lower early tomorrow. This is a 4-hour chart, but on an hourly chart, this is still staying the same, right? So let's say we test lower, it kind of holds, and then we flag, and it probably stops out the early, or we'll say late shorts from today. But that might give us a long trade, great. But then from there, if it starts to, if it rejects and then we break under the trend, this is where things could really start to come undone. So I want to keep an eye on both sides tomorrow, and we'll determine our bias the same way we always do in the first 30 minutes based on the direction the market's going, the context with the hourly and 4-hour EMA, and takes trade setups accordingly. But I'm curious if this is a possibility. I mean, of course it is. But all I really want you guys to think about from day to day is what's the bias going into that day. And if we're holding up tomorrow, then it's going to be long bias. And if we're not, then it could end up being short bias. But um, yeah, like something like this maybe. But we'll determine that in the morning as I always do with you guys. And we'll walk through the trades and ideas tomorrow when we get to them. I think that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you guys being here, and I hope you guys enjoyed the stream today. I'm looking forward to rolling this into some good trades tomorrow with you guys. So let's rest up and get them in the morning. Okay, guys, cheers.